Christmas is supposed to be about family love and creating beautiful memories with the people who matter most. I was holding my 8-month-old daughter Emma, watching her eyes light up at the twinkling lights on my parents' tree in Ohio. My husband Marcus, a military commander who had just returned from deployment, was finally home for the holidays. Everything felt perfect, warm, and magical. But I never could have imagined that this Christmas dinner would change everything forever. Truok kitoi ke kauchuyen nai hai chotoi biet banjang o jau trong diple nai han like new ban hiukam giach ki gia jin kong nhumong joy va subscribe jeng hit hem nhung kauchuyen chan thattukwak song. Va bai gio hai kung toi kwai lai jem giang sing jo. My parents' house in small-town Ohio looked like something straight out of a Christmas movie. Mom had outdone herself this year with garlands draping every doorway, twinkling lights wrapped around the staircase banister, and the biggest Fraser fir tree we had ever had, sitting majestically in the living room corner. The smell of her famous honey-glazed ham mixed with cinnamon candles filled every room, creating that warm, nostalgic atmosphere that makes you feel like a kid again. Our family was smaller than most. There was Dad Frank, a retired mechanic with gentle hands and an even gentler heart. Mom Linda taught 3rd grade for 30 years before retiring, and still had that nurturing teacher energy about everything she did. Then there was me, 26 years old, trying to balance being a new mom with supporting Marcus through his military career. My younger sister Sarah, 23, had always been the free spirit of the family. And finally, a couple of aunts and uncles who made the drive from nearby towns to join us for Christmas dinner. Marcus looked so different in civilian clothes, but even in his red sweater and khakis you could see the military training in how he carried himself. Straight posture, alert eyes that constantly scanned the room, hands that rested in precise positions. Emma absolutely adored him, reaching for his face whenever he held her, and giggling at his silly voices. She was the first grandchild on both sides, and everyone was completely smitten with her chubby cheeks and bright blue eyes. The atmosphere that afternoon started out exactly how Christmas should feel. Dad was telling stories about his childhood Christmases during the 1960s, when kids got one present and were grateful for it. Mom kept disappearing into the kitchen to check on various dishes, waving away any offers of help with flour-covered hands. Uncle Bob was setting up some elaborate camera system to capture everything for posterity, and Aunt Marie was cooing over Emma every chance she got. Everything felt normal and peaceful until Sarah arrived 45 minutes later than she said she would be. I noticed something was off the moment she walked through the front door. Sarah typically bounded into family gatherings with energy that could power the Christmas lights, but today she moved slowly, deliberately. Her usual bright smile was replaced with something forced and brittle. Her eyes looked red and puffy like she had been crying recently, but tried to cover it up with extra makeup. Sarah had been going through a particularly rough patch lately. She had lost her job at the marketing firm 3 weeks before Christmas, and her boyfriend of 2 years had broken up with her just last month. I knew she was struggling financially and emotionally, but whenever I tried to reach out, she would brush me off with some variation of, "I am fine, I do not need help." During dinner preparations, Sarah made several comments that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but carried an edge that made everyone uncomfortable. When Mom asked her to help set the table, Sarah muttered something about some people having it easier than others. When Dad mentioned how proud he was of Marcus's recent promotion, Sarah rolled her eyes and said, "Must be nice to have everything handed to you." I tried to include her in conversations about Emma's milestones, thinking maybe focusing on positive family news would lift her spirits. Instead, Sarah responded with comments like, "Well, not everyone gets to play house while their husband is off being a hero." The words stung because Marcus had been deployed for 6 months of Emma's short life, and those months had been some of the hardest of my life. Marcus, with his military training and reading people in situations, was clearly picking up on the undercurrents of tension. I caught him watching Sarah carefully, his jaw slightly tighter than usual, He had developed incredible instincts for recognizing when situations might escalate, and I could see those warning signals going off in his mind. By the time we all sat down to dinner, Sarah had already had 2 glasses of wine, and she was reaching for a third before the blessing was even finished. Mom tried to steer conversations toward safe, happy topics, like the upcoming New Year, or planning a family vacation for next summer. But Sarah seemed determined to find the negative angle in everything. "Oh, sure. A family vacation sounds wonderful for those who can afford to take time off work," Sarah said with bitter sarcasm, when Mom suggested renting a beach house in the Outer Banks. "Some of us do not have military benefits and steady paychecks to fall back on." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably and asked Uncle Bob about his retirement plans, clearly trying to redirect the conversation away from whatever was eating at Sarah. But the damage was starting to spread through the room like spilled wine on a white tablecloth. Everyone could feel the tension building, but nobody wanted to be the person to address it directly. Emma, being only 8 months old, was picking up on the emotional energy in the room. She started getting fussy during dinner, squirming in her high chair and making unhappy little noises. I tried to keep her calm with quiet songs and gentle bouncing, but babies are like emotional barometers. They sense when the adults around them are stressed, and Emma was definitely sensing something was wrong. Marcus suggested maybe we should take Emma upstairs to the guest room for a little break from all the stimulation, but Sarah chose that moment to make her most cutting comment yet. "Oh, here we go with the perfect little family routine again," Sarah said, her voice getting louder and sharper with each word. "Everything has to revolve around precious Emma and her perfect parents. Some of us do not get to escape to a quiet room whenever things get a little uncomfortable." The dining room went completely silent except for the soft Christmas music playing in the background. Even Uncle Bob stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Dad, and Aunt Marie set down her fork with a little clink that seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment and hurt. This was supposed to be a celebration, a time for our family to come together and enjoy each other's company. Instead, Sarah was turning it into some kind of competition or grievance session that nobody had signed up for. "Sarah, I think maybe you have had enough wine for tonight," Dad said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority he used to use when we were teenagers breaking curfew. "Do not tell me what I have had enough of," Sarah snapped back, turning her attention from me to him. "Everyone always takes her side. Perfect Vivian with her perfect baby and her perfect military husband. Do you have any idea what it is like to be the sister who never measures up?" I was holding Emma, trying to keep her calm while my heart was pounding in my chest. This was not the time or place for Sarah to air these grievances, especially not in front of our extended family, and definitely not in front of my baby. "Sarah, please," I said as gently as I could manage. "This is not about taking sides or comparing anyone. Can we just try to enjoy Christmas dinner together?" But my attempt at peacemaking only seemed to make her angrier. Sarah slammed her wine glass down so hard that red wine splashed onto Mom's carefully ironed white tablecloth, creating stains that looked like drops of blood against the pristine fabric. "There it is again," Sarah said, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Saint Vivian trying to keep the peace while making everyone else look like the problem. You have no idea what real struggle looks like. You got married right out of college to someone who could take care of you. You have never had to worry about rent or groceries or whether you were going to have health insurance next month." Marcus was sitting perfectly still, but I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching. His hands were placed flat on the table, and I recognized this as his way of keeping himself controlled when every instinct was telling him to intervene. Military training had taught him when to engage and when to wait, but I could see the internal battle playing out across his face. "You have never had to watch everyone around you succeed while you fail at everything you touch," Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "You have never had to come home to Christmas dinner knowing that everyone is looking at you with pity or disappointment. You have never been the family failure." The pain in her voice was real, and despite how angry and hurt I was, I felt a stab of empathy for my little sister. But Emma was getting more upset by the minute, picking up on all the negative energy and responding the way babies do when they feel unsafe. I stood up carefully, holding Emma close to my chest and speaking in the calmest voice I could manage. "I am going to take Emma upstairs for a few minutes so she can settle down. Maybe we can continue this conversation later when emotions are not running so high." But Sarah was not done. As I moved toward the dining room doorway, she pushed back from the table with such force that her chair nearly toppled over. "Running away again," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "That is your answer to everything, is it not? Just take your perfect little family and escape whenever reality gets too messy for you." I turned around, still holding Emma, and tried one more time to find some middle ground. "Sarah, I love you and I want to work this out, but not like this. Not in front of everyone and not when you have been drinking. Let us talk tomorrow when we can both think clearly." "Think clearly." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I am thinking more clearly right now than I have in years. You think you are so much better than everyone else. You think your life is so perfect and your problems are so important. You think that baby makes you special somehow." Marcus stood up then, slowly and deliberately. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Sarah, that is enough. You are upset, and I understand that, but you are crossing lines that should not be crossed." "Oh, here comes the military hero to save the day," Sarah said, turning her fury toward Marcus now. "The perfect husband defending his perfect wife and their perfect little life. You do not get to tell me what to do in my own family's house." Emma was crying now, not just fussy, but genuinely distressed by the shouting and tension. Her little face was red, and she was doing that heartbreaking baby cry that sounds like genuine fear. I was bouncing her gently and making shushing sounds, but nothing was working to calm her down. "You think you are so special with your military uniform and your fancy rank," Sarah continued, advancing toward Marcus with unsteady steps. "You think you can just waltz into our family and start making rules about what we can and cannot say." Marcus remained completely calm, but I could see his posture shifting slightly into what I recognized as a defensive stance. Not aggressive, but ready. "I am not trying to control anyone," he said evenly. "I am asking you to lower your voice because you are scaring my daughter." "Your daughter?" Sarah whirled around to face me again, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "That is the problem right there. Everything becomes about your precious baby. Everyone has to walk on eggshells and whisper and change their entire lives around that screaming little—" "Sarah, do not say another word." I warned, my own voice finally showing some steel. Emma was clinging to my sweater, her tiny fists gripping the fabric as she continued to cry. The room was thick with tension. Mom had tears in her eyes, and Dad was standing up like he wanted to intervene but did not know how. Our relatives were looking anywhere but at us, clearly wishing they were anywhere else on Earth. That is when everything went from bad to absolutely unthinkable. Emma's cries were getting louder and more desperate, the way babies cry when they are genuinely frightened rather than just uncomfortable. I was doing everything I could to soothe her, speaking in gentle whispers and rocking her in my arms, but the hostile energy in the room was too overwhelming for an 8-month-old to process. "I need to get her away from this," I said firmly, moving toward the doorway again. "This is too much for a baby to handle." But Sarah stepped directly into my path, blocking my way to the staircase. Up close, I could smell the wine on her breath and see the anger burning in her eyes. She was swaying slightly, and I realized she was much more intoxicated than I had initially thought. "Always running away when things get difficult," Sarah said, her voice slurred but venomous. "Always making it about the baby whenever you do not want to face reality." Well, maybe it is time someone told you the truth about your precious little princess. Marcus was beside me in an instant, his presence solid and reassuring. Move away from my family, Sarah, he said, his voice carrying a warning that anyone with sense would have heeded. You have said enough for one night. Do not tell me what to do in my own house, Sarah shot back, but she was looking at Emma now instead of Marcus, and there was something in her expression that made my blood run cold. You think that baby is so special, so perfect. You think she deserves to have everyone's world revolve around her. Emma was crying harder now, her little body shaking with each sob. The sound was piercing and desperate, the kind of cry that activates every protective instinct in a parent's body. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to move around Sarah, but she kept shifting to block my path. Look at her, Sarah said, gesturing wildly at Emma. Look at how she demands attention. Look at how everyone has to stop everything they are doing whenever she makes a sound. She is just like you, Vivian, selfish and demanding and convinced the world owes her something. That is a baby Sarah, Marcus said, his voice getting harder. She is 8 months old. She cries when she is scared or uncomfortable, just like every other baby in the world. Oh, spare me the lecture about babies, Sarah snapped. I know exactly what she is doing. She is manipulating everyone in this room, getting everyone to focus on her instead of the real problems, just like her mother has been doing her whole life. I was shaking now, not just from anger, but from genuine fear. Sarah was drunk, irrational, and getting increasingly aggressive. Emma's cries were becoming more frantic, and I knew I needed to get her out of this situation immediately. I am leaving, I said firmly, trying to step around Sarah one more time. This conversation is over. No, it is not over, Sarah said, reaching out and grabbing my arm. You do not get to walk away from this. You do not get to pretend like you have not spent your entire life making everyone else feel inferior. Marcus moved between Sarah and me so quickly that I barely saw it happen. One moment she was gripping my arm, and the next moment Marcus had positioned himself as a barrier between us, his face a mask of controlled fury. Remove your hands from my wife, he said in a voice I had never heard before. It was quiet, deadly calm, and absolutely terrifying. This is your final warning. Sarah let go of my arm but did not step back. Instead, she seemed to get more agitated, more unstable. You think you can intimidate me with your military posturing. You think you can just show up here and start giving orders to my family. Emma's crying reached a new level of intensity, the kind of screaming that sounds like genuine distress. She was clinging to me so tightly that her tiny fingernails were digging into my skin through my sweater. Her face was bright red and she was hiccuping between sobs. Please, Sarah, I begged, trying one last time to reach whatever part of my sister might still be listening to reason. You are scaring her. She is just a baby. She does not understand what is happening. Oh, she understands perfectly, Sarah said, her eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable. She understands that all she has to do is make noise and everyone comes running. She understands that she can manipulate people into giving her whatever she wants. That is when Sarah did something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. She raised her hand, pulled it back, and slapped my 8-month-old daughter across the face. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Emma went completely silent for a moment, her eyes wide with shock and confusion, her little face already turning red where Sarah had struck her. Then she started screaming, not crying, but screaming with a sound of pure terror and pain that I had never heard from her before. The entire room went dead silent except for Emma's screams. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. I stood there holding my baby, feeling like the world had stopped spinning on its axis. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had just hit my infant daughter. had just struck a defenseless baby in the face hard enough to leave a mark. "I was just trying to make her stop crying," Sarah said into the silence, her voice suddenly sounding smaller, almost confused. "She would not stop, and I just wanted her to be quiet. You are overreacting, Vivian. It was not that hard." The silence that followed Sarah's words was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not just quiet. It was the complete absence of sound, except for Emma's heartbroken screams. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. It was as if the entire room had been frozen in time by the sheer horror of what had just happened. I looked around at my family, desperate for anyone to say something, to stand up, to react, to do anything other than just sit there like statues while my baby screamed in pain and terror. Dad was staring at his plate, his knuckles white where he gripped his napkin, but he did not look up. Mom had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she remained silent in her chair. Uncle Bob was studying the Christmas tree lights like they held the secrets of the universe, while Aunt Marie suddenly found her dinner roll incredibly fascinating. The people who were supposed to protect us, who were supposed to love us, who had raised me to believe that family stands up for family, were doing absolutely nothing while my sister tried to justify hitting my baby. "It really was not that hard," Sarah repeated, and I could hear her trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. "Babies are tougher than people think. She was just being dramatic, crying like that for no reason. Sometimes you have to get their attention." I was holding Emma against my chest, checking her face where a red mark was already blooming across her tiny cheek. She was shaking in my arms, her cries now interspersed with little hiccups of fear. At 8 months old, she could not understand what had happened to her, only that someone had hurt her, and she was terrified. "You hit my baby." I whispered the words, feeling surreal as they left my mouth. "You actually hit my baby." "I barely touched her," Sarah said, but her voice was shaky now, uncertain. "She is fine. Look, she is already calming down." But Emma was not calming down. She was clinging to me desperately, her little fingers gripping my sweater like I was the only safe thing in her world. Her face was red and splotchy from crying, and I could see the handprint on her cheek getting darker. I looked at Marcus, expecting to see rage or action or something, but he was standing perfectly still. His entire body was rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and his face had gone completely blank. I recognized this look from the few times I had seen him truly dangerously angry. This was not the hot fury of a moment. This was the cold, controlled anger of someone deciding exactly how to respond. "Marcus," I said quietly, not sure what I was asking for, but needing him to do anything to break through this horrible silence. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he took one step toward Sarah, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear it, but it carried more authority and menace than any shouting could have achieved. "Get out!" 2 simple words, spoken with the kind of finality that brooks no argument. Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time since she had arrived, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. "Excuse me." "Get out of this house," Marcus repeated, his voice still deadly calm. "Right now." "You cannot tell me to leave my parents' house," Sarah said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "You do not have the right to—" "I have every right," Marcus interrupted, and now there was steel beneath the quiet words. "You just assaulted my daughter. You hit an 8-month-old baby. In any other circumstance, in any other place, you would be under arrest right now." Sarah looked around the room, clearly expecting someone to come to her defense to tell Marcus he was overreacting to restore some kind of normalcy to the situation. But everyone was still sitting in stunned silence, avoiding eye contact. "It was not assault," Sarah said, her voice getting higher and more desperate. It was barely a tap. She is fine. Vivian is being dramatic like she always is. Tell him, Mom. Tell him I did not really hurt her. But Mom did not say anything. She was crying quietly into her hands, unable to look at any of us. Tell him, Dad. Sarah tried again. Tell him he cannot just kick me out of my own family's house. Dad finally looked up, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen before. Disappointment so deep it looked like physical pain. Sarah, he said quietly, you need to go. The betrayal on Sarah's face was almost as shocking as everything else that had happened. She had expected our parents to protect her, to minimize what she had done, to take her side against Marcus and me. Instead, she was realizing that even they could not defend the indefensible. You are all crazy, Sarah said, her voice cracking. I was trying to help. She would not stop crying, and I was trying to get her to calm down. Sometimes babies need a little discipline. That is not abuse, that is parenting. Marcus took another step closer to Sarah, and I could see her instinctively step backward. That is not your child, he said, his voice getting harder. That is my daughter, and you will never ever touch her again. This is ridiculous, Sarah said, but she was backing toward the doorway now. You are all acting like I committed some kind of crime. She is fine. Look at her. She is fine. But Emma was not fine. She was still crying, still clinging to me, still shaking from the shock of being hit by someone she should have been able to trust. The mark on her face was getting darker, and I knew it was going to be a bruise that would last for days. Get out, Marcus said, and this time his voice filled the entire room with unmistakable command authority. Get out of this house right now, and do not ever come near my wife or my daughter again. Sarah looked around the room one more time, her face cycling through anger, confusion, and finally a kind of desperate realization that nobody was going to support her in this moment. Fine, she said, grabbing her purse from the side table. Fine, I will leave. But you are all going to regret this. You are all going to realize that you chose her over me, over family, over blood. She stomped toward the front door, then turned back for one final attack. You think you are so perfect, Vivian, but you are raising a spoiled brat who is going to grow up thinking the world owes her everything, just like you. The front door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows, and then there was silence again. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like the silence after a storm passes, when you can finally start to assess the damage. The moment the door closed behind Sarah, I felt my legs give out. I sank into the nearest chair, still holding Emma tightly against my chest, my whole body shaking from adrenaline and shock. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in, and it felt like a nightmare that I could not wake up from. Marcus was beside me immediately, his large hands gentle as he reached out to examine Emma's face. The controlled fury was still there in his eyes, but his touch was incredibly tender as he looked at the red mark on our daughter's cheek. We need to take her to the emergency room, he said quietly. I want a doctor to look at her and document what happened. The word document sent a chill through me. He was thinking like a soldier, like someone who understood that this might not be over, that we might need evidence of what Sarah had done. The thought that my own sister might be capable of something that required legal documentation was almost too much to process. Is she okay? I whispered, stroking Emma's hair as her cries finally started to subside into exhausted whimpers. Did she hurt her badly? Marcus examined Emma's face carefully, his military medical training evident in how thoroughly and gently he checked for any signs of serious injury. I do not think there is any permanent damage, he said finally. But that was a hard slap. Hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough to potentially cause a concussion in someone so small. Mom finally stood up from the dinner table, her face streaked with tears. Vivian, honey, I am so sorry. she said, her voice broken and raw. I do not know what got into her. I have never seen Sarah act like that before. But even as she said it, I could hear the doubt in her voice. Sarah had been building up to this moment for weeks, maybe months. The drinking, the bitter comments, the escalating resentment. It had all been leading somewhere, and we had all chosen to ignore the warning signs because it was easier than confronting the truth. We should have stopped her sooner, Dad said, finally standing up from his own chair. He looked older than I had ever seen him, like the events of the evening had aged him years in a matter of minutes. When she started drinking and talking like that, we should have said something. Marcus looked up from examining Emma, and for the first time since the confrontation began, I could see emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. She hit my baby, he said, and his voice was rough with suppressed fury. She looked at an 8-month-old child and decided that violence was an appropriate response to crying. I had never seen Marcus cry, not in all the years we had been together, but there were tears in his eyes now. Not the hot tears of anger, but the kind of tears that come from a place of deep protective love being violated. I want her arrested, I said suddenly, the word surprising even me. I want to file charges. What she did was assault, and if she had done it to anyone else's baby, she would already be in jail. Mom made a sound like she was in physical pain. Vivian, please. She is your sister. She was drunk and upset, but she is still family. Family does not hit babies, Marcus said firmly, standing up and positioning himself between Mom and me. Family does not assault children because they are crying. What Sarah did tonight was criminal, and the fact that she shares DNA with us does not change that. Uncle Bob, who had remained silent through the entire confrontation, finally cleared his throat. Maybe we should all just take a step back, he said carefully. Let emotions cool down before making any permanent decisions. The suggestion hit me like a slap. Here was another family member asking me to minimize what had happened, to consider the feelings and future of the person who had hurt my child, rather than focusing on protecting Emma. No, I said, standing up with Emma still in my arms. No, we are not going to take a step back. We are not going to let emotions cool down. We are not going to pretend this was just a family disagreement that got a little heated. I looked around the room at all these people I had loved and trusted my entire life, and realized that when it really mattered, when my child needed protection, they had all chosen to remain silent and hope someone else would handle it. Marcus was the only person in this room who stood up for Emma tonight. I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. The only person who was willing to put my baby's safety ahead of avoiding conflict or protecting Sarah's feelings. That is not fair, Mom said, fresh tears starting to flow. We were shocked. We did not know how to react. It all happened so fast. It did not happen fast, I replied. Sarah has been building up to something like this all evening. She was drinking too much, saying cruel things, getting more and more agitated, and every single person in this room chose to ignore it because addressing it would have been uncomfortable. Dad stepped forward, his face heavy with guilt. You are right, he said simply. We failed you tonight. We failed Emma. We were so focused on trying to keep the peace that we forgot our job is to protect the innocent people in this family. His acknowledgement of what had happened meant more to me than any excuse or justification could have. At least one person was willing to take responsibility for the choices that had led to this moment. We are going to the hospital now, Marcus said, helping me gather Emma's diaper bag and coat. And then we are going home to Virginia. I do not want Emma around anyone who thinks what happened tonight was acceptable or understandable or forgivable. What about Christmas? Mom asked desperately. What about tomorrow morning? Emma is supposed to open her presents. I looked at the Christmas tree with its twinkling lights and carefully wrapped packages and felt nothing but sadness. Christmas was supposed to be about love and family and creating beautiful memories. Instead, it would forever be marked by the image of my sister hitting my baby and my family's failure to immediately condemn it. "Christmas is ruined," I said quietly. Sarah made sure of that when she decided that her anger was more important than Emma's safety. As we walked toward the front door, I could hear Mom crying behind us and Dad trying to comfort her. I felt bad for their pain, but I felt worse for Emma, who was now old enough to sense when people did not like her, but too young to understand why. The drive to the hospital was silent except for Emma's occasional whimpers and the sound of Marcus's controlled breathing. I knew he was processing what had happened, making decisions about how to protect our family going forward. At the emergency room, the doctor who examined Emma was professional, but clearly disturbed by what we told her. She documented the bruise on Emma's face, took photographs, and gently suggested that we might want to consider filing a police report. "Child abuse cases are taken very seriously," she said carefully, regardless of who the perpetrator is or what their relationship to the family might be. I looked at Marcus, and I could see that he was thinking the same thing I was. This was not going away. This was not something we could handle quietly within the family. This was something that had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "We will think about it," Marcus said finally, but I could hear the decision already made in his voice. 3 days later, we filed charges. Not because we wanted to destroy Sarah or tear our family apart, but because we realized that protecting Emma had to come before protecting anyone else's feelings or reputation. Sarah tried to contact us dozens of times over the following weeks, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations, to threats to involve lawyers of her own. We did not respond to any of them. 2 years have passed since that Christmas dinner, and Sarah has not been allowed to see Emma. She has not been welcome in our home, and we have not attended any family events where she might be present. The extended family thinks we are being too harsh, too unforgiving, too unwilling to move on from a single moment of poor judgment. But it was not a single moment. It was the culmination of years of resentment and selfishness that finally exploded into violence against an innocent child. And more importantly, it revealed something about our family dynamic that I had never wanted to acknowledge: that keeping the peace was valued more highly than protecting the vulnerable. Marcus never said, "I told you so," about any of it, but I knew he had seen the warning signs long before I had been willing to acknowledge them. His military training had taught him to recognize threats and respond to them decisively, while my family training had taught me to minimize conflict and hope problems would resolve themselves. Emma recovered completely from the physical injury, but I will never forget how small and scared she felt in my arms that night, or how her cries sounded different afterward for several weeks. Babies may not remember specific events, but they remember feelings, and I spent months rebuilding her sense of safety and trust in the world. The most difficult part was accepting that sometimes protecting the people you love most means cutting ties with people you also love. It means choosing your child's well-being over your sister's redemption. It means accepting that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, and that some actions have consequences that last longer than the moment they occurred. Marcus became my hero that night, in a way that had nothing to do with his military service or his courage in combat zones. He became my hero because when it mattered most, when our daughter needed protection, he did not hesitate to provide it. He did not worry about hurting feelings or causing family drama or making things awkward for future holidays. He simply stood up and said, "No more," with the kind of authority that made it clear he meant it. I learned something profound about the difference between keeping peace and creating safety. For years, I had confused the two, thinking that avoiding conflict was the same as protecting my family. But real safety sometimes requires conflict. Real protection sometimes means being willing to be seen as the bad guy by people who value harmony more than justice. Now, when I look at Emma happy and healthy and secure in the knowledge that her parents will always put her safety first, I know we made the right choice. She deserves to grow up in a world where hitting children has consequences, where adults who hurt her are held accountable, and where her parents love her enough to be unpopular, if that is what protecting her requires. Christmas has never felt quite the same since that night, but it has become something more honest, more intentional, and more focused on the people who truly matter. We create our own traditions now with people who understand that family is not just about blood relations, but about who you can trust to protect the innocent and vulnerable among us. And sometimes late at night when Emma is sleeping peacefully in her crib, I think about how grateful I am for a husband who knew exactly what to do when everything went wrong, and who never once made me feel like choosing our daughter's safety over my sister's forgiveness was anything other than the most natural response in the world. What do you think about this situation? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting someone you love? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and the difficult choices we sometimes have to make. Share this with someone who might need to hear that putting children's safety first is always the right choice, even when it is the hardest choice. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope you and your families are spending this holiday season surrounded by people who love and protect each other unconditionally.